Hey everyone, this video is courtesy of my subscribers on Subscribestar, so thank you to everyone who supports me. This specific video was requested by my imprisoned tier subscribers. I'll try to fulfill as many wishes of those individuals as possible, so if you want to see content like this, you're more than welcome to go check it out. There's a link in the description, and if you ever want to talk to me or join in any of my organized games, you can join my community Discord. The link is also in the description. That's all. Enjoy the video. Beyond 3 deserts of scorching heat, one red, one white, and one black as the night, lies the kingdom of the unseen. Beyond the 3 deserts lies a plateau, hidden with mirages, always guarded by invisible sentinels. Beyond this barrier is a city covered in sand, the city of pillars. Iram, Ubar, what was once a hidden paradise with date palms, fountains and palaces in abundance, with great towers of brass and marble rising towards the heavens, fist-sized rubies and diamonds lighting the streets and palaces with air filled with music and pleasant fragrances, has now faded. The lords of Ubar, born from the smokeless flame and extremely powerful, were distracted with the houris of Jannah and lived sequestered lives in the city of brass, feasting upon grapes and dates of unequaled flavor. That is, until the Shaitan, another race of jinn also born from the smokeless flame who serve as advisors to the sultans, blamed mankind for the loss of magic and convinced the sultans to wage war against humanity. However, with salt and iron, mankind prevailed against Ubar, and the previous Pantocrator sealed the Afarit into their palaces. Now Iram is a mere desert city, ruled by the few remaining jinn and their human slaves. However, with the disappearance of the previous Pantocrator, the emirs have sensed opportunity. A new war upon mankind will be waged, and with the coming of the new god, the gates of brass shall open, and the Ifrit sultans will return. So to quickly review the strengths and weaknesses of Ubar, they've got a pretty good troop roster. Their mages are also very good. They have stealthy and flying stuff, troops or mages. They have great national summons and spells, and they also have some neat non-fort recruitment that they can use. The problems with Ubar, they're very cap reliant, so their best mages, their best troops, they're all from their capital only, so if their cap gets shut down, it can be considerably harder to win as Ubar. Also, their god cannot be taken awake, which ties into some of their mechanics, but it also means that their pretender options and their expansion is a little more limited, and that ties into the third point. Because of their later game power, Ubar is liable to get rushed or get coalitioned. Ubar also has very poor priests. They're all level 1 at the highest, and most of Ubar's stuff is pretty expensive, and a lot of it's not sacred either, so you're going to be paying a premium for it. Ubar also has some special magic sites that I wanted to mention before moving into the troops. So they have the 3 deserts, which gives gems, and also raises heat scales, but it does 2 armor negating fire damage to any unit moving into or out of the capital without wasteland survival. So this can hurt invading enemy armies, but can also wound independent stuff that you move into your capital, so just be aware that it exists. The Jannah gives 1 nature gem every turn and also increases growth. It increases growth, I think, by 3 scale ranks, so very substantially. Interestingly, you have no native nature access. But since it's the early era, nature is very abundant, so it's not a big deal. But you'll have the gems to make items, at least, from this magic site. The Vault of Incense and Marvels, which just gives an extra 100 gold a turn. Very nice. And the City of Brass gives 1 extra fire gem. And finally, the Iram of 1,000 Pillars gives a fire and an air gem a turn. So basically this means that when your god wakes up, you'll get 7 gems a turn, 100 bucks, and a bonus growth scale, which is all great. But before then, your capital is producing fewer gems than other caps in the game, only 5. This is a little early before we're actually talking about pretender design, but this is sort of a reason that going imprisoned is not worthwhile, except for the most late of late games. Because consider that for those extra 20 or so turns that your pretender does not wake up, you're losing 2 gems a turn that you would have got from your capital. So in total, you're losing like 40 gems by going imprisoned. And those are good gems, right? Like, fire gem, very valuable for you, but also nature gems. Diplomatically, this can be a somewhat useful tool as you're not actually as appetizing a target early game because your capital is just not worth as much as other ones. But do keep in mind that once your fort upgrades to the City of Brass, you grow in power, so people are looking to put you down early before that actually happens. So let's talk about their units. I've divided this into several sections, so we're going to talk about the non-fort stuff that you can make anywhere. Starting with the Ubar Desert Warrior. He actually hits pretty hard with his scimitar, but he's basically just a light infantry in terms of stats. His greatest value is his stealth rating, coupled with a low gold cost, so you can mass up a cheap force of these and go take out lightly defended provinces. They have a bow, so they can get value off flaming arrows, but they really can't stand up to frontline combat, and since they're undisciplined skirmishers, they're not the easiest to script. Since these are not slaves, your taskmaster boosts that a lot of your leaders have, their morale boosts, will not apply to them, so they have pretty garbage morale. The other non-fort unit is the Ubar Camel Rider, who is very similar to the Desert Warrior, but he costs 12 more gold. He gets better combat stats, having a high defense, more HP, more morale, and 12 isn't bad. They get a free spawn falcon, and most importantly, a ton of map move. With these things coupled with flaming arrows, you can do devastating stealth strikes into enemy territory. They struggle against heavy armored stuff with shields, so their ability to stealth move gives them a lot of survivability to avoid those engagements. You can deploy them when you want. They work like elves in that way. To avoid certain bad events, I would build one in every single province you own. Also, consider massing them up for raids. When you want to take a big battle, you can just get all of them together on the most important province because they have such great map move. But even with better stats, they're not the best frontline fighters. They're very squishy, and it's a big loss to lose these things to just heavy infantry. The last non-fort unit that you can make is the Ghoul. Keep in mind you can only make these in wastelands in other desert provinces. But these guys are stealthy units that when damaged will get superior stats and become ethereal. So with a bit of magic to proc their secondary state, they regenerate 8 HP a turn, making them extremely hard to kill with mundane attacks. Also, if they have any protection buff at all, they become ludicrously hard to deal with. They have built-in fire and poison resistance, so that directly ties into the primary magical way of proccing them. If you mass these guys up and you can cast Marble Warriors on them, they become stupidly cost-effective. They also have extremely good map moves, so they can be moved around easily. They're not sacred, and they are a bit pricey, but they're worthwhile. So before moving on, I should mention that all of your models have Wasteland Survival as a trait, and this is helpful for moving through deserts and avoiding supply problems, but it also assists with one of your national spells when we get there. To make ghouls activate very quickly, you should cast Sulfur Haze on the round that you think the front lines will be engaged, which is generally around like round 3 or 4 for indies. Sulfur Haze is pretty detrimental for humans, causing poison fire damage, but your ghouls have 15 poison resistance and 5 fire resistance coupled with insane regeneration. And furthermore, after transforming, they get a little extra HP, So with that regen, they're easily able to tank through the sulfur damage and get their ethereal state off, making it very reliable to actually get into their tanky state. Granted, ethereal won't work against everything, especially not stuff with magical weapons, but that is a tip to make these guys better. So now I'm going to talk about the human troops that you get in forts only, starting with the Ubar soldier. So you're paying 10 gold initially for what is basically just a generic light infantry with a javelin. The unit is otherwise totally unremarkable, except that it's a slave. So they have halved upkeep, meaning they only cost you 4 gold a year per model. It's substantially less than similarly priced troops, so it becomes very easy to mass these guys. Furthermore, you can buff their morale via Taskmaster boosts, which you have in abundance. Overall, the soldier is not particularly interesting, it's just basically a cheap javelin thrower. You can think of them a lot like the Greek nation's peltasts. They're cheap and they're good against low armor or shieldless units when massed, and they're very inexpensive to maintain, and when buffed, they're super cost efficient. Overall, a pretty normal human unit, but the slave tag and the javelin makes them absolutely worthwhile, and great for expansion too. The Ubarian archer is very similar to the soldier. He is by all accounts a fairly ordinary archer outside of having the slave tag. Again, cheap to mass, but short bows are not a very good weapon. You have superior archers outside of your forts in the form of the camels, so I would only use these for defensive purposes if you have flaming arrows or wind guide available to cast, as that will substantially improve their performance. And the units themselves are mere humans, so their map move is not very good. The last human troop is the Brazen Guard. 14 gold for your best melee human infantry. Not bad at all, with 14 defense built in, normally 12, but 14 with the shield parry. They don't do as much damage as other units would because of their bronze scimitar instead of using iron weapons, but it can't be helped. They have 12 attack, so they have pretty good stats, 12 HP, 12 protection, which is okay for the age. They're good units. They're quite comparable to the Go Hanamotos of Jomon, which are also worth massing. If you have the money, these are your best human line holders. With buffs, they can be even better. The main issue is you're going to be starving for gold anyways, so it's a bit risky to say that these units are always worth getting. They are slaves, so they do have low upkeep, which is very nice considering the high upfront cost. Overall, I really like them. I'd mass them a lot, but 3 attacks per square and using a length 1 weapon, it's not the best. Keep that in mind when facing giants especially. The soldiers are surely superior in such a scenario for their javelins, but against other humans, the Brazen Guard will shine. Also, they do have the bodyguard tag, so if you need to protect your assets, these guys can do a decent job against assassins. So now I'm going to talk about your cap-only stuff, but this is before your god wakes up. So really, that just leaves the Djinn Warrior to talk about. This is our first genie. Before we get into it, I'm going to talk about the common traits that all genies share. So when I talk about more of them, you can just assume that they have the Genie Kit, effectively. So they all have resist fire big. They resist shock 5, and they have a weakness to cold. Naturally, they are nearly immune to all sources of fire damage. Even big fire elementals will not be able to cause realistic damage. The extra shock resist is nice and gives you durability against storm spamming nations, but don't expect it to give you immunity. It's a minor buff, and you should strive to get further shock resist to make your units totally immune to orb lightning, lightning bolt, and so on. Finally, you have a weakness against cold, and 5 extra damage is pretty nasty on your smaller genies. Stuff like Murdering Winter will be hellishly effective on your genies if they're clumped, and Frozen Heart can be used to frag your elites, especially if they're alone. Therefore, try to avoid fighting nations with high water power, otherwise you'll have to get cold resistance on your genie somehow. Luckily, cold resistance is pretty easily in your colors, so casting Alteration 5 is a pretty easy goal for you. But this is just to shore up a vulnerability, not eliminate it. Warriors of Muspelheim is a great big spell you'd want to cast in that situation. Anyway, moving on. Genies are... almost all of them are stealthy, and I'll mention when they are not. Obviously, being stealthy means you can sneak into enemy land, you can fight when you want, where you want. You always have the initiative. They have magic power, so in Lands of Magic Dominion, your troops have greater strength, greater attack and defense skill. You can think of it as +1 to those stats per magic scale. So Magic 3 would give the Djinn Warrior 15s in all of these stats. Conversely, in a Land of Drain, your stats get worse. Of course, you should fight in Magic 3 land as often as you can to make your units better and avoid Drain. You should consider preaching Drain Dominion away before an invasion. You have an Iron and Salt vulnerability, so all your genies take extra damage from Iron, that is, excluding arrows. Just something to keep in mind depending on who you're fighting. At Construction 4 and Earth 1, Salt can be crafted and put in a miscellaneous slot, and it adds an extra armor negating attack that stuns. And this can be used against you if you're thugging with lone genie raiders, and there's nothing you can do about Salt. Just try to keep your cool and avoid sending out lone genies if your opponent is tilting you so hard. All your genies are magic beings, meaning they're vulnerable to all the spells and items that affect them, such as opposition. Generally, to protect against this, you'll want to raise your magic resistance. They're all ethereal. To hit a genie reliably, your opponent has to have a magic weapon. This is just a check for them, and if they don't meet it, your opponent is liable to get wrecked. This trait also helps in expansion a lot. Glamour. So the genies are really starting to look like elves. When a genie gets hit, the enemy rolls a die to see if they hit the real genie or just one of his mirror images. There are 2 other images, so it's a 1 in 3 to get hit on the first go. This gives great survivability to your genies, especially when coupled with ethereal, which makes it very hard to hit them with mundane weapons in the first place, and great defense skill. Makes it extremely difficult to even hit them. Flying. Granting great map movement, your genies can move very far, but because of their armor, several of your genies actually get slowed down. They're still faster than humans, though. This also helps with sieges a lot. Furthermore, this lets you hit the rear core of any army in battle, allowing you to hit both the front and also the mages at the same time, which is just excellent. Your genies have flies in storms, meaning that they can go and attack rear in a storm, which is something normal flyers cannot do, and this is a reason for you to always cast Storm. Your genies have Spirit Sight, which is a neat buff that allows genies to see in the dark perfectly and see invisible units. Well, what is an example of an invisible unit, you may ask? Your genies. All of them. When fighting in melee, on the first hit, all your genies give -10 to units if they do not have Spirit Sight. This is coupled with the power of Ethereal and Glamour. So in practice, your genies are unhittable by mundane things. This also makes them very hard to find when they're sneaking. So in totality, your genies have some pretty insane strengths, but they also have a couple debilitating weaknesses. I would say magic being the worst of them. And that is effectively the genie package. So back to the Djinn Warrior, he costs 50 gold and is not sacred, but his stats are kind of insane when fighting in Magic 3 territory. So here we see the first major issue about Ubar. The Djinn Warrior, and more to come, are all really expensive. 50 gold up front is not just hard on your treasury, but he's not sacred, so his upkeep cost is also pretty prohibitive. However, since they are not sacred, That does mean that you don't actually have to worry about how many holy points that are on your pretender. So holy points can't gate your potential recruitment. He even has good protection for the age. The Djinn Warrior's just a fantastic unit. When you get enough of them, you can beat every single indie type in the map. Since these are super expensive though, you should be cautious about spamming out so many of them that they eat up all your money, because you're going to have better options when your god wakes up. Speaking of which, let's go into those. So this is the first unit, the Guardian of the Forbidden Chambers. Well, with a name like that, you'd expect them to be sacred, but they're not. Instead, they cost 75 gold, but they have even better stats than the Djinn Warrior. In Lance of Magic 3, their defense skill is 18. 18 on a mundane, non-sacred unit. It's ludicrous. Notably, their weapon is also an enchanted scimitar versus a bronze scimitar, so they hit very hard and magically. However, they don't wear a hat, so magic range projectiles can snipe them. Their protection is just overall worse. They are, as the lore indicates, very good at protecting assets, so they are your best bodyguards. And these are very good elites. They really can defeat all indie types. Frankly, they may even be a bit overkill in Magic 3 land, but surely you'd want the best your money can buy when fighting against another player, right? Your first and only recruitable sacred unit is the Ifrit Warrior. They cost 130 gold, making them one of the most expensive units in the game, and you can only make one of them per turn. They do not have stealth, and they have low defense skill, and they actually have a very high salt vulnerability. However, they have a heat aura like an Abyssian, and a built-in fire shield. 10 armor-piercing damage, and also heat power, which functions identically to magic power except off of heat scales, meaning they get stronger, have more attack and defense in hot provinces. Basically, their stats get a fat +6 bonus if your Dominion is Magic 3, Heat 3, but they'll be very crippled in a land of cold and or drain. With a very strong weapon and great armor, these things are insane. As it says in the flavor text, they can absolutely butcher everything, and will largely eliminate units with reach 0 to 1 weapons. They'll just kill themselves. Obviously, these guys can take your bless, so you can power them up to being even stronger, but considering their limited recruitment, I'd hesitate to give them a big bless, as you will never have that many. Furthermore, you don't need to take a lot of candles to recruit these, as you only get one a month anyway. These guys have to be led by a commander that is at least size 4, which basically means you're limited to your big Ifrit Sultan commanders, unless you take an enlarged bless, which could be worthwhile. So that's all for the units. Let's talk about the commanders, again, going by the same way. I'm going to talk about the commanders that can be recruited in non-forted provinces. So you have the Ubarian Scout. It's just a pretty ordinary scout. I suppose he costs 5 less gold. He also has mountain and wasteland survival. It's always useful to have more scouting. The Ubarian Sheik, the leaders of the pastoral humans and caravans. These guys are your cheap raiding commanders who will lead your camels out and take enemy provinces. And since they have the tax collector trait, they can absorb gold from any province they're in, even if a line cannot be drawn to a friendly fort, meaning that you can do deep strike raids with this guy and nab your opponent's most lucrative land, giving you an economic edge. Otherwise, he's a fairly mundane leader with a poor leadership value, so we can't put units in formation. But he has 26 map move, which is pretty great. The Ubarian commander is a 30 gold, 60 leadership, -1 inspirational, but +2 taskmaster, means your soldiers would have 9 morale with this guy leading them. and be unable to stand in line formation or in other formations. So this guy's pretty bad, but being cheap is his main advantage. This is your starting commander, and I would avoid making any more, except for the purpose of shuffling armies around. Mages that can only be recruited in forts. The Kahin, a human priest, 70 gold. This commander is very comparable to Tianqi's Master of the Dead. He is a sacred, so his upkeep is very low, and he can random Fire 1, Air 1, or Earth 1. Fire 1s without Fire Gems are not very useful outside of crafting lightless lanterns. Air 1s can be useful in battle with Summon Storm power, and then casting Lightning Bolts, and Earth 1s are still not very useful without Earth Boots or Gems to let them cast Summon Earth power. Holy 1 does give them utility against skeleton spam, and with Taskmaster 1 and 10 leadership, they make just horrible leaders. They also don't have any magical or undead leadership either. Really, these guys are your lab monkeys. They will research 7 or 10 in Magic 3 scales for a extremely cut rate price. 28 gold per year is a pretty good deal. So if you want a tech and you feel pretty comfortable, these are your most cost-efficient option. And now we're talking about the Tuba, the Human Priest King. This guy, 195 gold, Fire 1, Holy 1, and can random Fire, Air, or Earth. They cost more than double the Kahin, and in upkeep too, without providing double the research points, so these are not technically your best researchers in terms of gold efficiency. However, the Fire 2s are super useful for casting a multitude of fire spells with Phoenix power. Furthermore, they have 85 leadership and Taskmaster 2, making them great for leading your armies. They even have decent combat stats, plus an occasional Guardian Spirit, which is an Air 1, Astral 1 Ethereal Lady, who can cast basically random AI spells, and that woman will occasionally show up with all your priests, but she has a higher likelihood of showing up on the Tubas and a lower chance of showing up on your Genies. So these guys can be thugs if you have a little bit of gear or pretty good research. A Fire in a Jar on a Fire 2 Tuba can actually do some real work if you can summon elementals. In the Human Sahir, 115 gold, not sacred, but he is a Fire 1, Air 1, and then again the same random Fire, Air, or Earth. These guys are very workable battle mages. Fire 2s are great, Air 2s are excellent, especially in big battles when you can cast Storm, so these guys can act as mainline kill batteries, casting a lot of your important spells. However, the Earth 1s are not so great, and they're best used to site search. They are not sacred, so you can't make that many of them. They're gonna eat up your money very quickly with 92 upkeep. And you're gonna be hurting for money anyway. With very poor leadership stats and also bad combat stats, thugging with these guys is a taxing prospect. So now we're gonna talk about your cap-only mages before your god wakes up. So you have the Jin Sahir. This guy has the Genie package. He costs 260 gold and is Fire 2, Air 2, with, again, the same random Fire, Air, Earth. This is your primary battle mage prior to your god waking up. He can also be thugged with some armor or just the Earth 1 guy, and he can do basically everything in battle. If he gets Fire 3 or Air 3 with a Storm, and I mean, he can't even do Storm at Air 4. Also, he has Obfuscate, which you can meme with this, I guess. However, the Sahir, much like the Human Sahir, is not sacred, so this guy will eat up a lot of your money. And frankly, you get some better battle mages after your god wakes up in your capital. The Jin Emir has the Genie package. For 265 gold, this guy is an excellent early game leader of other genies. He's realistically your best one, considering he is sacred and won't eat up that much money. He is Fire 1, Air 1, Holy 1, and has the same Fire, Air, Earth randoms. In Magic Lance, he's a really good thug with 15 attack skill and 17 defense skill. He's a good mage. If he's Fire 2, then he can cast Phoenix Pyre, and with Air 2, he can do Mist Form. Earth 1 can also boost his protection with Iron Skin or Stone Skin. All around, these are perfectly solid cap-only mages. The issue is that these guys just kind of get outclassed once your god wakes up. The first is the Huri. For 140 gold, you get a very mediocre, stealthy genie body. However, she can seduce. And seduction is a super powerful mechanic that lets you steal enemy, male in this case, commanders, even while they're leading their armies in the field. Based on the morale of the opponent, the seduction attempt could fail, which would lead to an assassination attempt. In those cases, you should make sure the Huri is equipped with acorns or bottles of water or anything really to help her complete the kill. Since she can fly, she can seduce from anywhere. It's a very powerful asset for a mere 140 gold. And since she can also scale walls, you can have these ladies with your armies and have them delve inside of forts to seduce the defending leaders inside. Also, they don't have a chest slot for items because, of course, they don't. The Shaitan, 340 gold. Okay, so this guy's very expensive. Oh, do keep in mind, before I forget, your capital now, after your god wakes up, produces 3 commander points instead of 2. So keep that in mind. You can get extra commanders out. You could get 1.5 of these guys out a turn, or you could get 3 of these every turn. So you get a Fire 2, Air 2, and then the same randoms as before, but now with blood. He is a genie. Magically, he is almost identical to the Jin Sahir, except for that blood random. And for that reason alone, they're worth making over the Sahirs, except they also enable your summons. Furthermore, apart from being a great mage, what separates them from the Jin Sahir is that they are a much better leader. They also are much better in combat, having greater HP and strength. They are a spy, and they have corruption. Corruption is really what makes these guys completely broken. It's basically the same as seduction, except it has a much higher chance of success, and it works on all targets. So these guys are basically like Swiss Army knives. They can lead armies of genies or whatever around. They can go on deep strike missions into enemy territory and clean out commanders, mages, anything with their corruption, and give those mages to you, letting you break into new paths of magic. They're excellent thugs. Having Fire 3, Air 3, or Earth 1 lets them feasibly take provinces with just elemental spam alone. Like a single fire in a jar on these guys makes them super efficient, but they can also fly everywhere, so they can converge with your main army to help in battle, and they're your best combat mage. They can cast everything the Jin Sahir could. As far as I'm concerned, I think this is your main mage you should always be making on your capital, and if you're not, you should have good reason not to. There is a pretty good reason though. That is the Ifrit Sultan. So, costs 570 gold and 6 commander points, meaning in your capital he is slow to recruit because you make 3 a turn. With Fire 4, Air 2, Earth 1, Holy 1, and Air, Earth, or Astral random, and then rarely something else. With Heat Power and Magic Power, this mage is just stupidly strong. He comes with the Genie Kit, and it's just a brutal nightmare for your enemies to deal with, assuming they're kitted properly and you have the right research. He can cast every single fire spell in the game with a single booster, so you've got all the fire spells. In battle, he can cast devastating stuff like Heat from Hell that can just annihilate armies alone. He has a built-in fire shield of 15 with With 57 fire resist, he is immune to fire damage. He is very dangerous for humans to attack. With air, he can mist form and get into melee combat, or he can become a super powerful caster in a storm, which you will be casting every time because storm only hurts your enemies. This guy can cast Eternal Pyre, should you find another fire booster, which is actually easier than you may think. And this is your native way into Earth 2. So these guys can make Earth boots, but that's sort of taxing because only 1/3 of these guys are Earth 2, and they take 2 turns to make. So you're going to have to spend a lot of cap turns recruiting these only to get Earth boots. It's worth it, but you should strive for a better option, maybe on your Pretender. Furthermore, it's random, so it's possible you could actually just get no Earth guys at all. Lastly, they come with Astral 1, which does open up a bit of neat stuff like casting Power of the Spheres or Personal Luck. Furthermore, since they're Earth, they can make Crystal Matrixes, which opens up big communions for these guys to lead. Realistically, you're going to be doing blood communions, considering how low your Astral is. Realistically, though, the Astral ones are the worst ones to get if your opponent is an Astral Nation, because they can cast the spell Magic Duel, where the enemy mage picks an opposing Astral Mage for them to both roll their unmodified Astral level. That means that boosters and spell boosts have no impact in that spell, so they'll roll a 6-sided die plus their Astral level, and the lower roller dies. No resist check or anything. So if your enemy has loads of Astral 1 spammable mages or really high native Astral mages, then your big dumb Astral 1 Ifrit is at extreme risk. It's better to just keep those guys away from magic duelers. Since these guys don't have glamour or stealth, you can tell them to cast Mirror Image, and furthermore, don't try sneaking around with them because it won't work. Lastly, these things take a lot of cap turns to make, and they don't have as much utility as your other cap-only stuff, and they cost a lot, so I would not make these guys constantly. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Ubar's heroes. So they get this Banu Silot, which is the same hero as what Nabal gets. It's a Fire 1, Air 1, and then Fire, Air, Earth, random, stealthy, sacred, glamour, flying mage with decent combat stats and equipment. It's basically a very budget thug chassis that you will get randomly. With higher luck scales, you'll be seeing plenty of these guys. They're very nice to have. They don't have the full Genie package, but they're still great. Earth 1s can boost protection, Fire 2s can get to Fire 3, and Air 2s can Cloud Trapeze. So these guys are absolutely not bad at all. So the Mother Ghoul, this is one of your ways into blood and death for you. She is stealthy, has insane regen, and is an excellent blood searcher, and can assassinate commanders. There is a lot she can do. Ideally, you'd want to set up a robust death and blood economy before using her on the front lines, considering how much economic power she generates for you. With a skull staff and a big black book, she can get you vampire lords, which are immortal super combatants. This woman gives you insane late game power. Speaking of insane late game power, you have the Black King. So this guy, he only comes up on turn 30 at a minimum, just like the Mother Ghoul only shows up on turn 15 at a minimum. But this guy's a genie, and he's completely insane. I mean, you can look at his magic paths. This guy can get to Water 4 with boosters, which lets you forge a Staff of Elemental Mastery, which would give +1 to all of his elemental paths. So realistically, this guy gets you elemental royalty. Without Earth Kings, sadly, because this guy can't. He doesn't actually have feet, so he can't wear shoes. But it does mean that you can cast at least half the spells in the game on this guy alone. But he's also just kind of a better Ifrit, so he's like insanely powerful. He can even go bully underwater nations with his amphibious. You can have this guy blood hunt or be in blood communions too. to just get even more stupid power. Ubar only gets a single special magical item, the Companion Bracelet at Construction 4 for 10 air gems. You give it to a mage who gets a wife, who is a Astral 1, Air 1 mage. This woman. And she has the Genie Kit, but is otherwise very similar to a Huri. Furthermore, this bracelet gives luck and +4 research to the equipped commander. If you compare it to the Pendant of Luck and an Owl Quill, which would cost 10 gems for either the bracelet or the quill plus the pendant, and would be almost the same, except the Owl Quill provides 2 extra research points, but the bracelet does get you married. Overall, you lose perhaps a gem or 2 on research, but you save a mage turn of building an item, and you get an invisible lady who may or may not be useful in combat. Perhaps she could eat a magic dual bullet for your Ifrits. It's a neat item, but it's kind of situational use. Air gems are extremely valuable for you, but getting lucky on your important commanders is very strong, and your astral access sucks. But your air access is good, so this is worth considering for that. So now to talk about your national spells. The Pride of Lions. So for 10 nature gems and a nature 2 mage, you get 10 plus of these lions. Contrary to their name, they are not actually so great. They can kinda see in the dark, but they have blast stats and very low magic resistance, being animals. They have decent strength and HP, which gives them some use early game, but where are you getting Nature 2 mages from? No. Save your nature gems for items that your big genies need to survive. So for 6 air gems at Conjuration 6 and Air 1 and Fire 1, this is all very achievable for you. You get 5 plus 1/2 of the level, in this case air, Hins, as long as you're on a Wasteland province. So the Hin is a decent unit. The stats are fine, and it's stealthy with a heat aura, great resistances too, and it's ethereal. Being unseen means mundane stuff has trouble dealing with these, but they are animals, and they are magic beings, so I wouldn't rely on them, but they can add frontline holding power by being your most shock-resistant thing. So if you're calling down the thunder, it can be worth to make these. It's also very efficient on air gems if you've got an air 4 casting this, but an air 2 is fine as well. Summon a Silot. So 21 air gems, Conjuration 6, air 2, you better be getting something good out of this, and it is. You get a mage, an excellent mage, a genie lady who is very similar stats-wise to a Huri, but Fire 1, Air 2, Earth 1. It doesn't break you into anything, but it's just an excellent magical path diversity setup. If you need powerful air mages, which of course you do, or maybe more seducers or thugs, which she is, then this is excellent. You don't have to spend cap turns making seducers now. Do keep in mind though, this spell can only be cast in deserts, in wastelands. Summon Bin. So kind of similar to the Hin, Conjuration 6, 6 water gems, 5 plus 1/2 level, but requires water and air. Again, this has to be done in a desert only. The Bin has excellent attack density, putting out 6 attacks per square. They're stealthy, ethereal, and unseen, so they're great in combat, but they have low base protection. They're a lot like a ghoul without regen, so with protection magic, they become really good. On their own, they're still strong, and they're worth the water gems, which you won't have too many other uses for other than making bottles, boosters, and summons. Anyway, Bin and Hin are both great uses for gems, and you can build armies very rapidly with them. Now we get to some of your big doomsday spells. You can contact the Merid at Conjuration 8, 2 water, 4 fire, and 60 water gems. Stats-wise, he is similar to your Ifrits, but he does have a Fear Aura, Unrest, and a bigger Fire Shield. He's also absolutely broken. He can teleport anywhere on the map, and he can cast half the spells in the game, very similar to the Black King. Again, he can even go underwater. With a few items, mundane harms are nothing to him. He even has 12 shock resist, which is cool. This is a super combatant chassis for water gems. It's really good. Okay, so here's an example template. If you put all these items on your Merid, you have a super combatant with fear, awe, poison resistance, fire resistance, shock resistance, regeneration, cold resistance, very high magic resistance, and generally comically invincible. Scorching Wind. Evocation 4, Air 2, Fire 1 means that most of your stuff can cast this. It causes 2d8 fatigue damage each turn in a 6+1 over level AoE. Your troops having Wasteland Survival are all immune to this spell, so you should spam it leisurely. It will quickly tire out the enemy army and let you chop them to pieces. In battle, it's a good idea to have several mages casting just this. Of course, this is useless on lifeless stuff or other enemies that have Wasteland Survival or high enough heat resistance, like 10 or more makes them practically immune, 5 gives them 50% immunity. The Smokeless Flame at Evocation 6, the flame that gives rise to the race of Ubarians. Fire 3, Air 1, a bit harder to cast than Scorching Wind, but it causes 45 armor-piercing fire damage and 15 armor-negating lingering heat damage in an AoE 1. Furthermore, it causes an AoE 10 combustion cast versus defense skill that causes 12 armor-piercing fire damage. So basically, this spell checks your enemies for fire resist, and if they don't have it, you wipe them out. Very, very little can survive 45 fire damage, armor-piercing, with the exception of your big genies. Much like Scorching Flame, it's a great idea to just have several mages casting this spell every battle to kill everything. Even against elites, this is basically just a kill spell. Even 25 fire resist would not save a 15 HP elite elf from the Smokeless Flame, for example. Moving into Blood, at Blood 4 you have a Feast for Ghouls. So Blood 1, very doable, and 21 Blood Slaves, not bad. You get Ghouls, because Ubar needs even more special spells. Your red boys can summon these pretty reliably, but this spell can only be cast in wastes. Keep that in mind. They're the exact same as the ghouls that you can recruit normally in Wastelands or your capital. If you have blood slaves to spend, this is not a bad way to spend them. Ghouls, Hins, and Bins lets you print armies for cheap. At Blood 5, still only Blood 1 and 31 blood slaves, you get the Gula. This is your other way into Blood. You get a Blood 1, Death 1 Assassin. You will easily be able to cast this, and these women are all great blood searchers. And with a blood stick, they'll be even better. Considering their price, you're going to be able to build up a blood economy exponentially fast thanks to their blood searcher trait. They also cite Search for Death, so if you want to get into skeletons, they can do that too, but you'll have to empower in Death or put it on your Pretender, or get the Gula hero, because at Death 1 they can't really improve. So Ubar has tons of potential with its summons, heroes, later game power spikes. It just needs to get there. As Ubar, you cannot take an awake Pretender, only dormant or imprisoned. And frankly, there is little reason to take an imprisoned Pretender. The power the City of Brass gives is immense, and you want to start printing your super mages and units as soon as possible. Before your god wakes up, your nation is considerably weaker, having little access to earth or blood, and no access to astral. No sacred unit power, and not as good fire or air power either. Basically, you should always go dormant. You're also losing 40 gems if you go imprisoned, 20 nature, 20 fire, or thereabouts. The extra scales for imprisoned won't matter, or the extra magic won't matter if you can't even get to that late game state in the first place. Don't forget, when your pretender wakes up, you also get +3 growth in your capital and 100 extra gold. So I would always go dormant. Maybe I would go imprisoned if the game is going to be extremely long, like well over 100 turns. You have a lot of choices as far as pretender chassis. As far as I'm concerned, Ubar is best served by a sort of utility rainbow pretender. Monsters will wake up too late to be that useful, and Titans are pointless because your nation just prints Titans all the time. So let's build a pretender here. I think the Serpent King is one of the better ones because you're going to be wanting high nature. You're also going to want higher blood for your summons and for forging items. Death 2 gives you the ability to forge skull staffs. Astral, you could conceivably stick at 2 or 3. Again, this is just for forging item boosters or some other crystal gear. So with Earth 4, you'll get Earth Shoes and a Bloodstone, and that will let you cast Earth Blood Deepwell. And since you can make Earth Shoes, you can hand them out to all your commanders. Water 1, because that's all you need for a water bracelet, so that way you'll be Water 2. And then you want to have Fire 2, so that way you can wear the Flaming Helmet and the Skull of Fire from Death, which means your Fire will be 4. Wearing those with a water bracelet means you'll have Fire 4, Water 2, so you can summon your Marids with your Pretender. So I think this is a pretty decent layout of magic paths. It doesn't give very much for your Bless, but I think it's okay. You don't really have a lot of Sacreds anyway, nor do you actually have that many Priests to even cast Blessing in the first place. If you want, though, this is modular. You can up these very easily or lower them as you please, depending on what you're fighting. Maybe you need more poison resistance because your lobby has a lot of poison resistance. So 4 candles because you don't need any more. You can go lower into Turmoil because you don't need recruitment points. You're not going to be gated by recruitment points, you're gated by gold. Similarly, you can go lower on Sloth because you're not going to be gated by resources, you're going to be gated on income. You want to stay at Heat 3 because that makes your big guys fight the best. So this, maybe this is controversial, but I would only go Growth 1. And the reason for that is Growth is a big income scale that scales exponentially as the game goes on later. But your capital is going to be Growth 3 no matter what. Even at Growth 0, your capital will be Growth 3. But with Growth 1, your podunk other countryside provinces will also get a little bit of growth and thus income, which I think is important for blood hunting because it'll sort of even out the population that you're killing by blood hunting. You absolutely want Luck 3 because your heroes are completely broken and make you even better, so you absolutely want Luck. You also want the Luck for the extra gems that it's going to be giving you because you're going to be eating up gems like crazy. And then you want Magic 3, because the later the game goes, the more powerful you become. And with Magic, you get to that later power level slot sooner. Furthermore, all your units have magic power, so being in Magic 3 makes them really freaking strong. You always want Magic. You never ever want to do Drain. That's always a mistake. So yeah, I think this is a pretty decent Pretender choice. You can see how perhaps these scales could be modified. Maybe you want more candles because you're worried about getting Dom killed. Maybe you want to go even lower on the growth because you don't think the game will go that long to get extra blood. Furthermore, maybe if you think the game won't go that long at all, you don't actually have to go that hard on the luck, maybe just a little to get out your extra commanders. Perhaps you want more power on your Pretender. For example, with this much def, you can reliably cast Well of Misery, and it also gets you a lot of bless points that you can use. I think with this much magic, you could cast Astral Corruption if you are wearing a crystal coin, the hat, and you have the little blood dagger and the blood robes on. You could cast Astral Corruption, which would be very powerful. So this is modular. You shouldn't think of this as like a stagnant Pretender choice. And of course, the Serpent King is not necessarily the best one. Other ones have their own utility, like the Great Sage will get you a lot of research, which can be handy if you're trying to tech up. This is your weakest phase of the game. Before your god wakes up, you're limited to your modest human troops and pseudo-sacreds out of your capital. 5 to 6 of the Jin warriors can basically take every indie province in the game, so I like to make at least a couple every turn in between my human slave recruitment, so that way I can get a flying force out and start taking distant provinces. Otherwise, 20 to 30 human javelins can kill a lot of stuff with relative ease. Pray that you don't border a Hellbless or Rushdown nation, or else you're gonna have to do some serious diplomancy. For spells, Conjuration 3 gives you essential power boosters, Alteration 3 for Misform, which can help your thugs, Evocation 2 gives you Sulfur Haze for your ghouls, along with Lightning Bolt and Flare, Evocation 4 gets you Scorching Wind, which can make the difference in certain throne battles or early game wars. Don't be afraid to spam it, remember that you're immune. Going for Construction 2 is decent. You'll get Owl Quills, Copper Plates, Fire in a Jar, and some other good situational stuff. Getting Earth buffs from Construction 3 and Enchantment 3 at this point is pretty unrealistic, so don't even bother unless you somehow find a Earth 2 Indie Mage. Your Earth 1 mages can get out Iron Skin at Alteration 3, which is situationally useful, but that's realistically about it. If you think you're going to get into an early war, you should prioritize Evocation for the extra blasting power that your mages will provide. Once your god wakes up, focus on site searching with your Supreme, Fire, and Air access along with Earth and Astral. So, your god has woken up, you've got your gems flowing in from site searching, and you have roaming bands of genie armies and camels. This is a big power spike time for you. Your research, you want Conjuration 5 for Elementals, and Evocation 5 and 6 for Storm and Smokeless Flame. There are other useful evocation spells too, like Breath of the Desert if you need Heat 3 on a province to make your Efreets stronger. Anyways, once you hit these two goals, you should realistically immediately go to war and take your opponent's capital. Your battle magic plus your OP troops should be enough to crush whatever you see. Granted, keep in mind who you're facing. If your opponent has lots of shock resistance, don't bother with lightning strikes and just get out fire elementals instead, or vice versa. Your big ticket killers are air and fire elementals, Thunder Strike, Scorching Wind, and Smokeless Flame, and you should change up your arsenal to better suit what you're facing. Like, for a horde of chaff, you just want elementals and Scorching Wind, while Smokeless Flame can kill single targets. With Shaitans and Huris, just go sit on enemy forts and just steal their commanders constantly. And with enough gear, mainly bottles of water if you can find water, they should be able to beat Assassination AI every time. Other useful research goals are Construction 4 and 6 for thugging items, and magic boosting diversity for your Pretender. Your Pretender should be walking around and site searching with some bodyguards, by the way. At Enchantment 5 and 6, you'll get Cloud Trapeze at Enchantment 4, which gives you teleporting movement interruption ability, which gives you even more movement power. Fire Shield is useful for your mages that don't have it by default. Flaming Arrows and Wind Guide with Alteration can be handy for your javelins if you want Flaming Javelin AP killing combo stuff. It's also a good way to make your modest human slaves more valuable. Of course, your camels can also be buffed with the same combo. And since your big fire and air mages can fly, you can deep strike with your camel raiding parties and then fly in a genie scripted to do Flaming Arrows and Wind Guide, and that could be a pretty big freaking surprise. Heat from Hell is also an excellent battlefield destroying spell that your Efreets can effortlessly cast. Against low morale stuff, Prison of Fire and Bonds of Fire at Thaumaturgy 4 can be situationally useful. Just make sure that your opponent does not have Berserker. Keep your Pretender site searching and forging item boosters until you're reliably able to get all your summons out. You should also begin blood hunting, and if you can, get Construction 6 sticks on your red boys and start summoning Ghoulas when you have time to get Blood 5, because you want as many of those women out as possible. At this point, your opponent has surely summoned enough shock and fire resistance that your big combo isn't exactly working perfectly anymore. But that's okay, because this is when you get your second power spike. Eternal Pyre is an easy peasy spell for you that you should cast every game to increase the flood of your fire gems. With those gems, just cast Elemental Royalty or Purgatory if you're facing a Skelly spam nation. Flames from the Sky at Evocation 9 can brutalize armies that rely on in-battle fire resistance to stay alive. I mean, with enough fire gems, you'll just be launching ICBM strikes on every province your opponent owns. You just put up domes of flaming death on all your labs to punish enemies who try to frag your lab team. Cast Firestorm at Evocation 7 to just delete a battlefield with an Ifrit. You can parachute your Ifrits with fire gems to spam Living Fire at Conjuration 7 and just produce instant armies of fire elementals. At Construction 6, you have your Water Booster Bracelet. Give it to your god, have him summon your Marids from the depths, and with Marids, your air access is pristine. A single booster of air, and you'll be casting Gale Gate at Thaumaturgy 8, or the Air Queens at Conjuration 8. You can summon a Psylocke at Conjuration 6 and have her print you Hins, and just build up a stupidly big army of cheap units. Marids can also summon Bins if you've got water gems to spare. Marids can do the same teleport drop as Ifrits, but now they can do it underwater, and then they can summon water elementals, or if they're on land, they can do living air, which is arguably even better. At the same time, your Pretender and your red men should be blood searching, if they have blood, with blood search sticks at Construction 6. Once you get enough slaves, keep summoning Ghoulas, who will also search for blood slaves, and just continue to print Ghoulas until you're absorbing hundreds of blood slaves a turn. With Construction 6, you've also got Lightless Lanterns, so your research should be top tier. Blitz down the blood tree, cast whatever horrible blood spells you want. Presumably the best one in a vacuum will be Curse of Blood for your immortal Deathblood vampire super combatants who can cast Darkness, which doesn't affect you. With 2 death boosters, the vampires can also summon Wraith Lords at Conjuration 7, so you should be able to do that too. With a booster, your Shaitans can summon Storm Demons, which are excellent to have for you. They fit very nicely into your Genie armies, and enough Storm Demons can wipe out a lot. If you have enough death on your Pretender, you should consider casting Well of Misery at Conjuration 8. And if you've got Astral 4 on your Pretender and at least Blood 4, then cast Astral Corruption and just completely ruin the game for everyone else. Otherwise, just spam out Fiends of Darkness at Blood 9 or Demon Lords at Blood 9 if you want even more super combatant chassis. Just cast all the globals, take all the thrones, become the Panto Man. And that's all for the Ubar guide. I hope this was helpful.